games.
An underrated player that I really liked is Keisha from season 10. And I think that she was so great because she was a person that was super genuine in her feelings, and she did not go with what everyone else wanted to go. She played with from her heart, and she chose people that she knew would help her game and people that she actually liked. She wasn't, a liar or anything. She was very straightforward. She cried when she wanted to cry. She was happy when she wanted to be happy. And it got her pretty far, but I think she's definitely an underrated player.
I think the most underrated Big Brother player was Haley because she played such a great game and she saw level 6 before anybody else did. She tried getting Tyler out. It didn't work, but she did have some good game skills.
You know what's interesting? I read an interview in the season with Jackson, Mickey, and Holly, the showmans that made it. I believe they both made it to final 2. I read an interview once where a former house guest, my favorite former house guest, Nicole Anthony, was telling about how all the things that Holly did that we didn't necessarily see, that was kind of like, kind of under the radar, and that she was hoping that Holly just would have verbalized that a little bit better at the final 2 to really show what kind of game she played. And after I heard that, I remember thinking, oh gosh, that makes a lot of sense. So I would say Holly. I think she perhaps did not get as much credit, and that's unfortunately what happens if you go final 2 with a showman. So you got to really be prepared to have the evidence to back it up.
I would say Brett from BB20, probably because his social game was insane. And I think people kind of let that slide on the radar as far as like, that wasn't really game, when really this is a social experiment. And that's what it's about, being social. All the rest of the stuff falls right after it. And not only that, he was great in comps, and he was always at 11 in the DRs and in the house. And you could just tell that's a genuine person. That is who he is when you meet him. I've never met him, but I assume that's who he is. And that's why I think he's the most underrated player.
The player that I admired, but I didn't really liked it, was Rachel. I think she was in season 12. She was a little bit toxic.
James, only because I think that a lot of people think he didn't do much in the house in order to get to the final 3 when he was with Nicole and Paul. So I would say James would be the most underrated player.
Ian, and I guess that's just from like right off the bat, just being a little quirky, being Ian, and you learn later on how smart he is, especially watching the season. But it was one of those things, you come into the house not being a physically, bearing person. It's something where, you see Ian right away and you just, and not that you're not scared, but you're like, okay, I really don't have to worry, but you learn quickly just kind of how mentally smart he is and how he plays the game, how good of a player he was.
I don't know if he's underrated, but Tyler Crispin, he played an amazing game. He did make it to the final 2, and I just don't think he gets the respect that he deserves. He is a beast of a player and definitely one of the all-time greats in my book.
I would have to say Azah. I really, really liked her gameplay. I don't think she got enough attention as she deserved, although she made it towards the end of the game. I think she was extremely loyal. I think that's a hard thing to do throughout the game, and she maintained her loyalty throughout the whole thing, and I don't think it was highlighted enough.
I know what first comes to mind because I was actually like somewhat of a big fan of his, but I think he was probably underappreciated, would be David Alexander. Yeah, I don't know. I think he was incredibly funny. I loved seeing him in the house. He was out week 1 and I think BB21, and then he came back in All-Stars and people were just at his throat the entire game. But I genuinely think he was like the funniest person to ever play Big Brother. And I think he's an incredibly underrated person. So I don't know him at all. I've never spoken to him or anything, but I would love to have a chat with him. So I think he's super cool.
I think the most underrated Big Brother house guest is hands down Rennie Martin from Big Brother season 10. She came across as kind of, the quirky older woman of the season, but she actually had a really great social game. She gave us iconic moments, iconic fights, and ultimately, I don't think she gets enough credit. She was the house target week 1, made it all the way to the final 5 where she was taken out because she was too big of a jury threat. So I love me some Rennie.
It would probably have to be Tyler from season 20. So he didn't win Big Brother, but I think the game that he played throughout the entire season was definitely worthy of being a winner for that season. I just think he rubbed people the wrong way, and unfortunately, he wasn't voted to win from the jury. So I think Tyler would be my most underrated Big Brother player.
Tiffany from season 23. I believe that not a lot of people give her as much credit as she deserves. And I think that she was a force to be reckoned with. She created the cookout, she created the grand scheme, and I just think that she just wasn't highlighted as much as she should have been.
Derek from last season, I love him, and I was so bummed that he went home so early and so quickly, but he was just a great communicator and strategist.
I know this answer is going to get me a lot of flack, but I keep going back to season 3, and I think about Marcellus all the time for underrated players. He didn't hide his personality. He led with his gut a lot of the times. His strategy wasn't really that terrible when you think about who he aligned himself with. He should have used the veto. I'll say that. That would have saved himself from going home. But I think Marcellus played with heart, which was a mistake, but it took him pretty far in the game. And I think he owes a lot of respect for what he did that season.
To me, the most underrated player in Big Brother to me was, I think Josh. I think Josh had a great game. I think that he just allowed his emotions to get in the way of how he did, but he did ultimately do what he needed to do. But I felt like overall, like, people really didn't, count him, as tight as he was.